Hello, and welcome to the Deadly Digest, the show about psychos, sadists, and serial killers. This week, we're going to talk about a case that destroyed a family and nearly tore the city of Boston apart. I'm your host, Delaney Bartlett, true crime writer, and I'm going to pass it over to my co-host.
I'm C.F. Roberts, local writer, videographer, chimney sweep, all that stuff, all that good stuff.
Jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades, yeah.
So when we were putting together the cases that we wanted to cover for this season, this case was your suggestion, and I had never heard of it before, which makes me feel kind of embarrassed. But what made you want us to cover this case?
Well, I was living in the Boston area at the time that it took place, and it was a big shock. There was no getting away from it. It was in all our faces. A very powerful case, pregnant woman and her baby being a couple of the victims and whatnot. As the case wore on and got stranger and pretty much blew up and fizzled out, I had a couple of takeaways from the whole thing, but I'll kind of get to those later.
Okay. Well, why don't you go ahead and take us through the facts of the case.
Okay. Well, Boston, Mass., October 23rd, 1989, affluent white suburban couple are on their way home from a Lamaze class at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And they have car trouble. They're rolling through Mission Hill, which is a poor, crime-heavy, predominantly African-American neighborhood, and have car trouble and they stop. From there, emergency responders are called to the scene. Nearby, a crew from the television show 911 are on hand, and they shoot crime scene video that ends up on CBS Evening News. For the couple, the husband, Charles Stuart, was shot through the abdomen while he was checking the car. His pregnant wife, Carolyn DeMady Stuart, seated on the passenger side, had been shot in the head. The story, according to Stuart, was that a black man had forced his way into the car, demanded money and jewelry, and shot them both. Caroline died several hours after the shooting. An emergency C-section was performed in an effort to save the baby, Christopher. Christopher was born a couple of months premature. However, he suffered oxygen deprivation and trauma during the shooting. And he hung on with this kind of long, painful vigil for a while, but then died after 17 days.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, that's rough. And people were just sitting there hoping for the baby to pull through. The baby did not pull through. Anyway, it was a big deal. Like I said, it was all over the newspapers. We might mention how big Carol's funeral was. More than 800 people, including Boston Mayor Ray Flynn, governor, and I think at the time or shortly thereafter, presidential candidate Michael Dukakis and Cardinal Bernard Law were all in attendance at that funeral. That Charles identified the assailant as a black male was not out of the realm of possibility, given the makeup of the neighborhood. But what occurred over the next several months was something that set racial tensions in the city into condition red.
Right. So let's go ahead and backtrack and get some context on this case.
Yeah.
So Carolyn was from a middle-class family. They were from the north end suburb of Medford. In the summer of 1980. Medford?
Yes, Medford. Medford.
Oh, right,
then
yeah.
you go down to right. Cambridge. Sorry, I'm from there. I know all the lingo.
So in the summer of 1980, she had graduated cum laude from Suffolk Law School, and she was studying to become a CPA. While she was studying, she was working as a waitress at a restaurant, and that's where she met Charles. Charles was a cook there. He came from the suburb of Reading.
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 Yeah, Reading.
Sorry.
That's all right.
My apologies.
Well, that's cool. Like I said, I know the area.
So anyway, despite not having a college education, in 1983, he kind of got a little bit of a break. He got a job at Caucus & Sons Furs, which was a family-owned business. And the family, I guess, took a shine to him and kind of promoted him up pretty quickly. Within 2 years, he was a general manager. And so Chuck and Carolyn got married. And everybody, their friends and family, called them the all-American couple. They said they would jog together, and every day before work they would kiss before they left the house. So, you know, they were the perfect couple.
Yeah, I believe people threw the word Camelot around.
Right. So back to the case now, and the investigation. So the city went into high outrage over this crime, as could be expected. It was pretty brutal. So the pressure was really high on the police department to get out there, solve this case, and arrest the perpetrator. And the mayor went on television and vowed to the city that they would find this guy. But, you know, people were really angry, and some of these lawmakers were calling for a reinstatement of the death penalty. They began to build a profile. Besides Charles's description that it was a black man, they said that he probably lived in the neighborhood and had probably committed crimes against people in cars before.
Yeah, it's kind of starting to sound a little bit like that last case that we covered.
Yeah, the Central Park 5. There's a
Yeah.
theme here. People will say that we have an agenda.
Yeah.
Yes, for justice. So anyway, at least Donald Trump didn't stick his nose in this one. So that's
Yeah.
one important difference.
You got that much going for it.
Yeah, right. So the outcry in the public and the media sparked this big manhunt that was really draconian. The police focused mostly on the Area B Police District, which is a predominantly poor and black area of Boston, comprising Mission Hill, Roxbury, and Mattapan. Did I say those right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, my southern tongue just can't handle that northern accent. So more than 100 additional officers were brought in to look for the man that Charles described. His full description was it was a black man, he had a raspy voice, he was wearing a black sweatsuit with red stripes, and he was about 6 feet tall. During this manhunt, they were routinely violating people's civil rights. They were doing warrantless searches, break-ins, strip searches, all kinds of unconstitutional things. And it was so bad that the city was described as being under siege and was compared to the Vietnam War.
Yeah. One of the first people arrested or looked at was Alan Swanson, who was a homeless black man who owned a black sweatsuit. He was not the first person, but he was the first person whose name was released to the public. After that, after putting Area 2 through this for a couple of months, the police finally arrested Willie Bennett, who was roughly the right age and height, had a raspy voice, and had a history of committing violent crimes, including 2 shootings. After months of invasive manhunt that just exacerbated racial tensions, police finally had their man. But no one was ready for what came next and the turn the case was going to take. And when the entire narrative collapsed, it would take some unexpected parties to prevent the whole city from blowing sky high.
So it looked like everything was going to get wrapped up. They'd found their man and things could go back to normal. But then there was a revelation that came out. Chuck, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. Willie Bennett was in custody and looked like the whole thing was about to be wrapped up when all of a sudden rumors started flying around, and those rumors were that the police were looking at yet another suspect. And this suspect was one of the victims. Anyway, it seems that Charles Stuart's brother Matthew had approached police on January 1st, 1990, and said that Chuck had planned to kill Caroline for insurance purposes. He talked to Matthew into the scheme as an accomplice, having him meet him at the crime scene and take the gun and Caroline's purse, throw them in a river, thus faking the robbery.
Right, because apparently Charles had taken out at least $82,000 in life insurance on Carolyn.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also important to note that Matthew and Charles together had previously done some fencing and some insurance scams, so this wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility for these two.
Yeah, no, that's something new. Anyway, the police issued a warrant for him, and Charles Stuart disappeared. They found his $16,000 Nissan Maxima, which he had bought when he cashed in Carol's insurance money directly after leaving the hospital. But it was parked on the Maurice J. Tobin Bridge over the Mystic River, which, if you ever seen that bridge, it's a big old bridge. And he jumped 145 feet to his death. His body was fished out of the Mystic River the next day.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that was a big shock to everybody.
It sounds like it. Yeah, the day they fished him out of the river was actually my birthday. But yeah, so once he was dead, like more and more information started coming out about their marriage and about them. And this whole illusion about the perfect couple and Camelot was really starting to dissipate. It turned out that a big disagreement that the couple had was over children. Carolyn had always wanted children, Charles not so much. He had a dream of opening up his own restaurant, but because Carolyn wanted to have kids and quit working to be a stay-at-home mom, he saw that as a major obstacle to his dreams. And so, killing her for the insurance money kind of took care of both of those problems very neatly for him.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, an old friend of his named David McLean was later quoted as saying that Charles had said he was worried about Carolyn, quote unquote, getting the upper hand in the marriage, and tried to talk McLean into helping to kill her. Think on that, the upper hand. Now, think about the fact that this guy was willing to shoot himself and then kill his wife to get the upper hand.
And not just shoot himself in the gut. That's like one of the most, if not the most painful shots or injuries that you can get.
Yeah.
So, I guess he was dedicated.
Yeah,
if nothing
points
else.
for being serious about what he was doing.
Yeah. So, but another thing that I read when I was researching this case was that just days before the murders, he was found buying jewelry for his mistress, which was this other woman he worked with at the fur store. And another disturbing detail that came out, probably the most disturbing thing, I think, is that the Stuart brothers had conspired to kill Carolyn for insurance money before. This was not the first time. According to the Washington Post, several weeks before the murder, according to unnamed police sources, Matthew staged a robbery of Charles Stuart's home at his older brother's request. The plan, apparently, was for Charles to kill Carol while making it appear that she had walked in on an intruder. But the Stuarts came home early that night, so Matthew had to hide in a bathroom and escape without Carol's knowledge, and Charles apparently changed his mind.
Yeah, boy, some cold planning there.
Yeah.
Cold. As far as the aftermath, the original suspect, Willie Bennett, was released, and his family filed a lawsuit with the city of Boston. A judge rejected the suit, but the mayor did apologize to the Bennett family and to the black community, but too little, too late. The FBI opened an inquiry into the Boston Police Department's actions.
Yeah, I wonder whatever became of that.
Yeah.
I did see
Good
that.
question.
Yeah, I did see that CBS made a made-for-TV movie called "Goodnight, Sweet Wife: A Murder in Boston." Sounds like the Lifetime original movie kind of
Yeah.
kind of thing. Anyway, as for Matthew, in 1991, Matthew Stuart was indicted for obstruction of justice and insurance fraud for his role in covering up the crime. He was released on parole in 1997, but then he was later rearrested on charges of cocaine trafficking. On September 3rd of 2011, Matthew was found dead from an apparent drug overdose in a homeless shelter in Cambridge. But back to the case. Once the truth came out about who really killed Carolyn and Christopher, apparently the racial tensions in Boston hit borderline riot levels.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were there, so that was the thing you said you remembered most about it, right?
I remember that, yes.
Yeah. So, but the good thing is that there was kind of an unexpected peacemaker that stepped up, and that was Carolyn's family. The DeMaty family came out and they did community outreach and events to try and heal the wounds as best as they could. In their daughter's memory, they established the Carol DeMaty Stewart Foundation to provide scholarships to Mission Hill residents. By early 2006, the foundation had awarded $1.2 million to 220 students. The family said Carol would not want to be remembered as the victim of a sensational murder, but rather as a woman who left behind a legacy of healing and compassion. And I think that is just incredible for a family to have gone through that much trauma and grief, to still try and help others and to try and heal that. Because it wasn't Carolyn that accused a black man.
No.
It was Charles.
Yeah. And what a legacy.
Yeah.
That's I mean, I would never want to end up that way, but that's a good legacy to have.
Yeah. So what have we learned from this?
Well, first off, I guess leave it to the affluent white guy to blame the black guy. It always seems to come back to that, doesn't it?
Right? Yeah.
We've seen this a lot. Blame the black guy. Also see the Susan Smith case. It appears to be the standard operating procedure to kind of throw the black guy under the bus.
Right. And also some like relationship red flags. Like the first one, you know, if you're a true crime fan like myself, you know when you hear that the couple is the perfect couple, the all-American couple, they have the perfect marriage, you know something's about to go down. So you cannot judge a book by its cover. But also like being in a relationship, looking for those red flags. So if somebody has that worry that someone's getting the upper hand, or they want to get the upper hand, and they're becoming more controlling, and they take out a big life insurance policy, run.
Time to run.
Time to run.
Yeah. Something, I don't know, another thing that was one of my big takeaways from this. Okay, so pursuing the American dream at the expense of others, I guess, you know, just maybe what we call like the Great Gatsby experience or something. What are they willing to do? In 1991, Bret Easton Ellis put out his autopsy for the Reagan years, American Psycho. And you know what? Charles Stuart was the American Psycho. This guy, I can't think of any better embodiment for the Reagan 80s. This guy's going to go for what he wants. He's going to get it. He's going to go for the money. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you're in his way, good night, Irene. What's he willing to sacrifice in order to get it? He's going to sacrifice his wife. He's going to sacrifice his unborn child just so he can get his little restaurant. It's like, wow, you couldn't wait a few years, huh? Anyway.
That's a great way to end this, I
Just
think.
a complete lack of empathy. I mean, he showed at every turn they had no empathy.
Exactly. You're right. He was the American Psycho.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for staying with us for the case of Charles Stuart, and tune in next week to the Deadly Digest.